We just started doing the study group, though, and I really like that because it is giving the momentum and the incentive that some people need to stay on task. Lives are really busy. So that's another thing. When you go to a course with the people that you work with, they know that you were there. You've announced your intention to become certified. It's not a secret anymore. And so there's just kind of some positive peer pressure there to get it done.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now, it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on the First Case podcast, we speak with Wendy Zander, entrepreneur and owner of Zander Perioperative Education. Wendy is a nationally recognized surgical services expert. She's also a mom of four, a wife, and catamaran sailor who recently accepted a position as the regional manager for several critical access hospitals in Western North Carolina. And Melanie, I love speaking with educators. I'm an educator myself. I've definitely presented at many national conferences, but this CNOR certification and this program that Wendy has put together is just such a huge benefit. And she's helped so many get their CNOR certification, I believe, including you.
Yes, absolutely. I was part of her class a couple of years ago, and we learned so much. She prepared us so well for the CNOR. I felt like by the time the class was over and I had done all the studying that I was fully prepared for that test. And it was all of the preparation that she had given me. And I'm really looking forward to talking to her today.
Well, I'll tell you, standardized tests can cause a lot of anxiety in many people, including nurses. And I remember going and taking the NCLEX, and not only myself, but all my peers were very nervous. I want to pass it the first time. I don't want to have to take it a second time. Structured programs like this can help so much. I can't wait to talk to Wendy about some of her tricks and insights into the world of certification prep. So with that, we'll be right back after a short break with Wendy Zander.
You're listening to the First Case podcast.
Joining us now is Wendy Zander, entrepreneur and owner of Zander Perioperative Education. And today, Wendy, we're going to talk about the CNOR certification. I just want to welcome you to our second episode of the First Case podcast. Really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So, Wendy, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience and tell them a little bit about your background?
All right. Well, I have a long time I've been in nursing, but I ended up as the OR educator in a little hospital. Well, actually, it was kind of a large hospital in Columbia, South Carolina. And I was only in the OR for a year and a half when I became the OR educator. When they had the educator position open, I applied knowing that I wouldn't get the job because, well, I'd only been in the OR for a year and a half. But I wanted them to know that I was ready to do more, and I thought it'd be good, experience with interviewing and such. So I applied, and they hired me. Oh my goodness, when they hired me, I think I almost cried. And they weren't happy tears. They're like, oh, look, she's so happy. No, she was freaking out. So what do you do when you don't have this 10 or 15 years of experience to pull from? Well, I'll tell you what you do is you become an expert in the guidelines. So I got my guidelines book and I learned them. This was around the same time as SCIP and SIP and IHI and World Health Organization, and Atul Gawande started writing his books, Better and Checklists and some of the others. And so I really dug into best practices because I didn't have the experience. And at the time, I thought that I was trying to make up lost ground, but it really worked well for me in the long run because, well, now I'm doing this, aren't I? So I became an expert in the guidelines. So that's where all of this started, was getting hired too early.
You might have gotten hired too early, but you definitely became an expert, it seems, very quickly. It was obvious when I took your class that you knew what you were talking about. But how did your desire to educate yourself so you could do your job better turn into a certification class that you were wanting to offer to everyone?
Right. That is actually really where everything started, was while I was digging into the guidelines and I was trying to come up with best practices, I myself needed to be certified. Now, remember, I'm in the OR for a year and a half. When I became the OR educator, I was not eligible to sit for the CNOR exam yet. So as an educator and gathering all this information was because I was studying for my own CNOR exam. And so while I was studying, and might as well come up with something to help my staff, right? So that's where I first made a CNOR prep program, was while I was studying. The very first time I taught a CNOR prep class for my own staff was 2 weeks after I became a CNOR. And so I remember, while I was getting ready to take the exam, I'm thinking to myself, oh my goodness, what if I don't pass this thing? I'm going to go teach it in 2 weeks. But, good luck. It turned out that I passed. So fast forward a few years, I was the educator, and then I became performance improvement manager for surgical services. And my AORN chapter asked me if I would do it as a fundraiser for them. And so I got contact hours behind it. I'd been doing it for some time, and we had a 100% pass rate in my own facility, and there were surrounding hospitals that were sending people to my classes on the weekends. My director was kind enough to open the classroom to anybody who wanted to come. So my AORN chapter asked me to do it as a fundraiser for them, and they made a bunch of money. And I went, hey, yeah, man, here, And so that's when I decided to throw my shingle out, and I was still going to do it quarterly like I had done in the hospital, only I was going to get paid. That was the plan. And it ate my life. It ended up being all I did for several years. I had planned for years to go back into surgery someday. I was just taking a hiatus to get this off the ground, and then I was going to go back to the OR. And I'm just getting ready to do that now. But it's been almost 10 years.
So, Wendy, it sounds like this worked out great for you, and you're able to survive teaching. How many people do you normally have in a class, and how long does a class take to go through?
We have really full 2 days. We do it on a Saturday and Sunday. We have 16 contact hours, but that means that we're in class about 9 hours each day. So for breaks and lunch and all of that, we end up with about 16 hours of real instruction. And so pretty involved. But a normal class size is right around 25 is about average. This past weekend, I had 37 in my class. And this coming weekend, I actually have 97 right now, doing it as a virtual class. So luckily, we had been doing this class in what we call the virtual classroom, which is, video streaming live. We've been doing that for years. Actually, before I even quit my day job in the OR, we had been doing video streaming. So for a long, long time. And well, initially it was because I was trying to keep the day job. So I thought instead of traveling, I will just do it online. But actually it was the virtual classroom that really made the business take off, because I would have, maybe 20 or 30 people from maybe 15 different hospitals. And so it ended up being word of mouth marketing. I've never done any kind of marketing other than word of mouth. And so it's really the virtual classroom that gave birth to that.
I took your class in person a couple of years ago, and I loved it. How much you knew about everything that was involved in the CNOR, while it was overwhelming at the time for me, just trying to learn it all, but getting it from somebody who was so passionate about all of this stuff and just how much there was to know and what we should do and where we should study. I had about probably 5 or 6 years of OR experience at the time when I took the test, but you don't need that much to take the CNOR. How much experience does somebody need in order to take your class and then sit for the test?
The CCI, Competency and Credentialing Institute, which is the entity that gives the exam, they require 2 years. And they say that they base the exam on 2 years of OR experience, but that is some really broad experience for somebody to get in 2 years. So it really depends on where you're coming from, how much additional study you're going to have to do. If you work in a hospital that does all these different kind of services and you participate in many of the different services, or you work evenings, nights, weekends, and so you're doing a little bit of everything, you actually are way ahead of the game. If you work in one service, or a lot of people who are studying to become RNFAs, they have to have the CNOR to finish school and to become an RNFA. But they are really challenged because they have a big depth of knowledge in one area, often working with one physician. But this is an exam on everything. It's broad. So the broader your knowledge base is, the quicker you're going to become prepared. I used to tell people 4 to 6 weeks is what I found at my own facility. People needed 4 to 6 weeks of study. But as I'm doing this around the country, I find that people who have a large depth of knowledge in one area, but it's not very broad, they're more about 6 to 8 weeks. Now, I did performance improvement and surgery, so I was the data geek. And I still keep my data. And I follow up with people afterwards to see whether or not they passed. And I can tell you the sweet spot is right about 6 weeks after class tends to be the peak. Just generally speaking, it takes about 6 weeks. And I recommend that you study an hour a day every day for those 6 weeks. And you can do anything for 6 weeks, you know. We'll just kind of suck it up there for about 6 weeks and then we'll get it done.
I actually followed those recommendations exactly, minus like a gigantic cram session the week before I took the test just because I was so anxious. But I followed those recommendations for studying, for going over your paperwork that you had given us and going through the book. And everybody that was in my group when we took your class, all of us passed. Which was really exciting. And on your website, you have the question, why should you take this course to prepare for the CNOR exam? And your answer is because people who take this course pass. But talking about your statistics, do you know how many people statistically will pass the test if they take your course?
I look at it about 2 months out, because I recommend that you should take it in about 6 to 8 weeks. And so I don't look farther than that. Officially, I don't keep my data, but I can tell you for people who take my class and test within that 2-month time frame, we hold the highest pass rate in the country for CNOR and for CPAN and CAPA, which are the professional certifications for the pre and post-op nurses. And they hover between 95 to 98%. It depending on a lot of variables. I tried to look at it in a lot of different ways. And really it comes down to right about 95 to 98% for all three of those.
That's amazing.
So, Wendy, it sounds like you've got a great demand for people taking this class. So what's their motivation? Why are they doing it? What's the primary reason? And do they get reimbursed for taking your class? Is there any percentages on that?
Mm-hmm. I can tell you most hospitals, not all, but most do have some financial incentive behind that. Like they get a quarterly bonus if they maintain their certification, or it helps them climb the clinical ladder, or they want to be a traveler and their traveling company requires it, or it's required for a promotion. Now, I do have a couple of hospitals that are actually requiring that their regular staff, their OR nurses, gain certification, say within 18 months or 2 years of hire. And I honestly, even though I do this for a living, I have kind of mixed feelings about that one, because I have worked with a couple of people who potentially were going to lose their job if they didn't pass, and they had been unsuccessful a time or two in the past, and they had one more try or they were going to lose their job. And my heart really goes out to them, because this is a very difficult exam. It's not a cakewalk. You're going to have to really try, and you're going to have to study to get this accomplished. And so putting that kind of pressure behind it of losing your job is something that I don't necessarily agree with. But it usually is financial incentive, but not always. Sometimes it's just a personal goal. It's something that a professional, with their own professional development, they want that. They want that certification. And so sometimes it's that, but often financial.
You said that many get their CNOR for the financial benefits. What kinds of benefits are hospitals offering staff who become certified in the OR? Do you have any stats on that or information on that?
Just anecdotal, what people are telling me. I don't have any statistics that I can quote to you. I can tell you that it's usually a quarterly bonus is what I'm hearing, or a bonus at the end of the year. So in other words, if they don't maintain their certification, they lose their bonus, but it's paid in quarterly or annually. But I shouldn't say it's most of the time. Sometimes it's that, but it could also be climbing the clinical ladder. So certification is required for them to achieve the next promotion. So to become like a Clin 4, they would have to have some professional certification to achieve that.
So Wendy, one of the things that I know about any kind of course in general versus self-study is that it gives our chaotic lives some structure. And I think that I listened to Melanie say she followed your recommendations exactly by putting in an hour consistently. And I think so much of the magic is there. I realize, Melanie, you still crammed at the last minute just because you were nervous, but it wasn't like you crammed at the last minute for the entire exam.
Right.
And I was wondering, Wendy, could you talk a little bit more about class versus self-study? Because I know for me, just the structure is a big help, but I got to think there's other reasons why a class is going to yield more success with passing the exam than just being out there on your own.
There is. Now, I can tell you, though, that you can study on your own. You can, but you had better be quite the self-starter, very motivated and extremely organized. So you're going to have to go to CCI's website, and you could look at their handbook and look at exactly what topics they're going to test on in the 9 different subject areas that they test on. And you could get the resources. So it's actually probably a little less expensive to let somebody else organize all of that for you. And I think that the reason that we're really successful in helping people pass the exam is a couple of different things. And one is that we record the class, and we offer all of our students a recording of the class, and they have access to that for up to 4 months after they take the course. So that they can look at anything that is difficult for them and review it and listen to it as often as they like. We also do a study group. I give them a bank of 200 extra practice questions. I check in on them. I offer my services if they would like me to be a coach for them. I have some people that will email me frequently for questions, and then a lot of my students I never hear from again. We just started doing the study group, though, and I really like that because it is giving the momentum and the incentive that some people need to stay on task. Lives are really busy. So that's another thing. When you go to a course with the people that you work with, they know that you were there. You've announced your intention to become certified. It's not a secret anymore. And so there's just kind of some positive peer pressure there to get it done.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, sitting in class with all the people that I worked with, and we were all taking this test, and everybody's like, did you study? Did you study? It did keep you accountable. I am a very much in the classroom, hear from the teacher, write it down kind of learner. But I see that you also do offer a virtual option or online other things for people who maybe can't attend a class in person. Do the people taking your virtual classes or doing it differently than in the classroom have the same kind of success rate as the people sitting in class?
Do you know the virtual class has the highest pass rate?
No way.
I know. That's not what I thought either. I thought the face-to-face classroom was probably going to be the most successful. And I was a little hesitant when we first did the virtual class because I felt kind of disconnected from the class and, is this still going to be effective? Now, it's not a statistically significant difference. It is just over 1 percentage point, but it's higher. Now, on demand, I've been doing just over a year. The on demand is using the recordings only. And initially, I'll tell you, the on demand, the pass rate wasn't as good as face to face. And what I find is that people order the on demand and then they don't complete it. They don't complete the class. And so I'm working on checking in on them and seeing how they're doing because that accountability is missing then because they're just going to do it on their own at their own pace, which is really nice for some really busy people. And if they complete the class, their success rate is just as good. But quite a few people who order the on-demand don't end up completing it. And so I'm trying to think of ways that I can encourage them to complete it, and sending reminders is the first thing we thought of.
So, Wendy, you said you're also teaching a CPAN class, so maybe you could tell us a little bit about that for our peri-anesthesia listeners. How long is that class, and what are the topics that you go over in that course?
Well, the CPAN and the CAPA, so it's pre-op and post-op, and we teach those at the same time because the difference in the exams is only about 5%. So you can teach both of them at the same time. It's just CAPA is going to be more about patient teaching, and CPAN, you'll have some more invasive things. But we go over each system, pre-op and post-op considerations, special populations like pregnant or pediatric patients, some complications like awareness under anesthesia or also malignant hyperthermia. Then we have a whole section, a whole morning on the second day is all about anesthesia and pharmacology. And so we talk a lot about physiology in both of the classes. In CNOR and in also the peri-anesthesia class, we're heavy on physiology. I think that the rationale behind why things work really help you to use those critical thinking skills during the exam.
Now that COVID is going on throughout the country, I'm sure it's impacted everything. Are you teaching any more about that when you're getting into the pre-op and post-op phases of care?
A little bit. I have to teach to the exam, and all of the exams that I teach right now were written before COVID was a thing. So you're not going to have COVID on the exam, and that's the purpose of the course. So I don't go into it too much, but I am such a hardcore geek. I am such a big nerd, and I absolutely love it.
You're on a podcast. We're all big nerds.
All right, you're my people. But I really get excited about things like thermoregulation or microbiology and virology. I think that it's really cool the way it works in the body. So when we're talking about transmission-based precautions, or we're talking about ACE2 cells in the lungs, and we're talking about ACE inhibitors, people who are on ACE inhibitors. So they have an increased viral load because they actually develop more ACE2 cells because we're inhibiting their angiotensin converting enzymes. So it's those kinds of physiologies that we'll get into and talk a little bit about COVID with it, but it's just the geeky side note kind of stuff. It's not really teaching to the exam at those points. It's just keeping it interesting and current.
Okay, what about for you for classes personally? Has all of the pandemic affected your ability to have people in class? Do more people want to do a virtual option just for safety?
Yeah, I just did my first face-to-face class. It was the end of September, September 28th and 29th in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Our Lady of the Lakes. It was the first class that I have done face-to-face since we started. And we did social distancing, and, I think that it went really well. But every other class has been virtual. And I don't want to say that the pandemic is ever a good thing, because of course it isn't, but it did have a silver lining for me because, I have been teaching this class and traveling around the country for a decade now. And I had planned that one day I would go back into surgery. It's just, I couldn't stop running hard. I couldn't stop to actually go back into the OR. And then all of a sudden I find myself, sitting in my home office, teaching to a camera and, having a Zoom meeting for all of my classes instead of just doing a couple of them a month. Now, the virtual classes that I did pre-pandemic were live from a hospital. So I brought my equipment with me, set it up in the classroom, and I had my face-to-face students, and then I had a camera sitting in one of the desks, and that was my virtual student. And so I taught like that. And now I'm just doing it from my home office. So that's how it's changed for me, is that all of them that way. But it has afforded me the time to really think about going back into surgery. So I start my new position on October 26th. It's my first day back in the OR for almost a decade. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to get my hands on patients again. Now it's a management position, but that's not going to stop me. I'm really excited. I'm excited to get back into it. So that has been the big change for the pandemic. And when we start traveling again, I have a lot of really qualified educators that will be doing the brunt of the travel for me.
Excellent, Wendy. Well, congratulations on the new opportunity and also for the great pivot and adjustment that you did in continuing to educate with the current circumstances with the pandemic. I think many of us have found ways to continue to be successful and continue to help others. You're a glowing example of that. So again, congratulations on the new job, but very well done on this interview. And I think anybody who is out there just trying to help others advance their education, advance their knowledge, be a resource should be commended. So really appreciate you coming on today. Nice job.
Oh, thanks so much.
That was Wendy Zander, entrepreneur and owner of Zander Perioperative Education. And Paul, I just love hearing stories about not only how entrepreneurs have been able to survive the pandemic, but obviously nurses in the field. But this is such a unique kind of offering where Wendy was very used to doing these classes in person, immediately pivoted, continued to have success doing it online. And then all of those students out there that were trying to pursue the CNOR had the opportunity to still get instruction. And I just love seeing that creativity. I know there's so many examples out there, but Wendy is just another glowing example of that.
Well, I think Wendy has done a fabulous job of promoting and helping people get their CNOR. And what really surprised me was the fact that there's so many different reasons for getting the CNOR. It's not just a financial reason. People who want to become travelers may need it for the agency they're working for. They may want to become an RNFA, and in order to do that, they have to get their CNOR. Or it might just be for personal growth, that they feel pride in having that certification. All wonderful reasons for getting that certification.
Yeah, professional growth is just so key for that intrinsic reward. You know, we all get into nursing out of a motivation to help others, but sometimes that motivation for personal growth is something that almost gets secondary because we're so focused on the job. But then when it comes time where we are motivated to do it, it is always nice to have some help and some structure. So I think Wendy's done a very nice job of that. And I know she's got a team of 5 educators that are going to continue to do those in-person classes, and they'll continue to do the online classes as well. Appreciate her coming on for our very first guest interview here on the First Case podcast. That's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and Spotify. We'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the growth of our show. And on behalf of Melanie and Paul and myself, thank you for listening to this episode of First Case.